Well, hello, and thank you for joining me for another Alex on Tech and iTWireTV interview. I'm joined today by Ken Mizota. He is the regional CTO for APJ at Rapid7. Welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me, Alex.
Thank you for taking the time. Now, Rapid7 was founded in 2000, and the company's founders began the new venture with the idea that it is key to know exactly what's on a given network, its vulnerabilities and prevalent threats, before providing effective security solutions. So, fast forward to 2022, is that still the company's mission?
The core of our mission still remains intact, and that is visibility to threats and how they affect your environment as the basis of effective security. Now, to do this well, we have to think like attackers think, and we have to understand what they value. Now, this idea remains at our core, and we've adapted with the technology of the day that's come about over the past 20 years. And so our mission has really expanded beyond visibility to include prevention, detection, response, as well as automation, which helps our customers deliver the outcomes they need to secure their organization.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's that whole thing about know thyself and then take advantage of all the modern technologies that allow that automation, that allow all the sophistication and maturity that we have available to us in 2022, and which is still evolving with the bad guys coming up with new ways and the good guys having to come up with ways to, trick the bad guys into thinking that they're doing something good, but they're really being tracked the whole time. Now, a lot has changed, as we were just basically discussing, over the past 2 decades. So for the benefit of our viewers, what products and services does Rapid7 offer customers today?
Yeah, so Rapid7 offers solutions to help customers manage threats, risks, and attacks before, during, and after they happen. And all of this is powered by automation, machine learning, and threat intelligence in a singular cloud-based security platform. Our solutions help organizations secure their cloud, secure your applications, users, as well as infrastructure, to ensure that security can be operationalized within the context of your business. And so, our solutions, just as examples, they can be used to power up security teams, to give them tooling. But we also offer managed services for companies who really don't wish to build out security skills in-house.
Yeah. Well, I mean, with cybersecurity more important than ever, there's so many examples of breaches and companies who've managed to block things, but just always this ongoing, this got leaked and this database, and there's that website I use called Have I Been Pwned, and every now and then my email address pops up, and I've signed up to dark web services, and some of those are telling me about things that Have I Been Pwned told me about years ago. But it's good to know that this is becoming much more of a sort of a prevalent thing. But bad actors are finding more ways to play the whack-a-mole game, as we were discussing before. There's exploits, there's social engineering, ransomware, zero-day attacks, and it's just never ending. So with all that, what truly makes Rapid7 different? Because some of your competitors would say that they're doing exactly the same thing that you've just described before.
Yeah, and I think it kind of goes back to the core of how we think, and when we say how we think, we talk about how attackers think, and attackers work off the clock. The rules of business don't really apply to them. And that they don't really have to care about working from home or business units or product lines. They're very much outcome driven. In that sense, they're actually like a business. But Rapid7, of course, is different in that our ambitions balance the need for these built for purpose tools that counter sort of what the attackers do with the reality that the defensive expertise to use those tools is actually scarce, and it's getting scarcer. So the adoption of our broad portfolio of what we call independently excellent and award-winning technology solutions, as well as managed services, the adoption of that is really evidence of our intent. And so I think all of it at the heart of this is how we bring that all together to help customers operationalize cybersecurity within their org.
Now, I did talk about just before, ransomware and 0 days, but what are the biggest threats facing businesses right now, and what is coming over the horizon?
I think the biggest threats that we see now are a lot of times people think, well, you're a technologist, you should answer in technology terms. But actually, economic disruption has really affected a broad base of organizations around the globe. And what it's really done is it's made some technologies much more relevant to businesses. Cloud and end user devices, like laptops in particular, have become indispensable the past few years. And that has turned into this moniker, or this term called digital transformation. And that's not just a term anymore. That's now budgeted and in implementation for many companies. And so as a result of that shift, that economic disruption, there are entire new classes of threats that companies have no muscle memory to deal with. Whether that's a set of workloads that are migrating to a public cloud, those can result in unintentional misconfigurations. Laptops and cloud services that are used to keep businesses running, all are going to shape our technology investments for years to come. And so to me, it feels like we're not really in a lull of, okay, now let's start to make things normal. We're actually in a period of accelerating change. It's only going to keep going from here.
Yeah, I mean, whenever I hear about digital acceleration, which I've heard over many years, it's often the case that I think that companies have gone through one set of it. Some of it was successful, but then things changed and they went through another set. And then, some of those accelerations weren't completed before another wave of something came along. And of course, we now have all these different cloud services and shadow IT. And you mentioned misconfigurations. And I've heard of companies talking about cloud misconfiguration. So, I mean, clearly that's one of the big problems where data can be leaking.
Yeah, I mentioned cloud misconfigurations because with any new activity, and just think about this as a human, with any new physical activity, one has to build strength, one has to build muscle memory. And companies have learned to understand, have understood over the decades how to secure networks with firewalls and network segmentation and things like that. But cloud service providers change that paradigm, and they release new services and products all the time, every month, every week. And so this means that if you need to point your finger at a best practice, whatever it is, it's probably pretty nascent. And so it's easy to make a mistake. And as businesses drive their strategy, they transform themselves, and they operate at scale, mistakes are not a probability. They are a given.
There's certainty.
With all technology. Yeah, there's certainty.
That's it.
That's right.
Well, I mean, as we know, businesses like to be N-1, always on, the version before because it's stable. But with cloud technology, I mean, that's always N+1. It's always changing. You're always getting the latest version. You sort of have to have it so that you've got to hive off a special sort of cloud section to say, hey, we're not going to apply our latest changes for this company. But I don't know how many cloud software as a service providers actually do that. Do you know?
That is not a normal mode of operation
for cloud service providers.
For cloud providers, but what I would say is that as with any answer, there's no binary answer. It's usually for some of the largest companies in the world, some of their largest customers, they will make exceptions, but that's helpful if you are one of their largest customers. But if you're not, then there aren't any exceptions.
So look, I'm sure people have heard of all sorts of data leaking out, but what sort of data are attackers getting from these vulnerabilities?
Yeah, I think about this a lot, unfortunately, and what I always come back to is that bad news travels fast. So what that means is that we tend to hear about the worst cases, massive breaches of financial information, or in cryptocurrency, hundreds of millions of dollars being lost, or disruptions of service, meaning manufacturing lines being brought down. But what is overlooked is that most of the data that is actually exfiltrated or stolen is by far much more mundane. And leaking email addresses and physical addresses may not garner headlines, but that information remains of value to attackers, from criminal gangs who use this for social engineering purposes, to a very sophisticated nation-state actor who is continuously scouring the internet to enrich their intelligence databases, to track threats abroad. Successful attackers, of course, in all of this, don't like attention. They don't like to be in the news. And so they use what information they can to serve their needs. And once again, they work off the clock, so they can actually be more patient than, say, a public company running on a quarterly earnings cycle. And that means that the mundane things to them are still useful, as long as they're easy to get.
Now, you recently released the Rapid7 Cloud Misconfigurations report. So what were some of the key findings?
I think there are 3 findings that I can sum up. The first is that cloud misconfigurations affect every organization. Breaches can hit any organization, no matter the size or prestige. There's no sort of maturity that you reach where all of a sudden you're immune. High-risk industries, of course, include the usual suspects like information technology companies, healthcare companies, and public administration services. All of these groups should be especially aware of the threats and the risk that their data represents. Because again, the majority of the data compromised isn't the flashy, high-value nuggets. It's not necessarily the crown jewels like credit card information or government IDs. Simple data like names and locations and addresses can be powerful weapons for a social engineer to get leverage. So it's really critical to keep these seemingly less important tidbits safe. And the good news is that's the second part. The third part is that many of these breaches that we find have causes that are easy to fix. They occur as a result of users manually relaxing security settings on cloud resources. Keeping some of these cloud resources safe in many cases can be as easy as leaving the default security settings intact. So to sort of go back, there's companies of all sizes can be affected. The data itself is not necessarily high value to on the surface, and the causes can be fixed if you actually pay attention to them.
Well, I mean, that leads to the next obvious question, which was, what are some of the learnings from the report in the sense of what should companies be doing to, sometimes default settings as well are something that can cause problems because people are not fine-tuning it enough. So what are some of the things that you're teaching your customers to do and sharing in the report to encourage people to take it seriously?
I think that the good news is that the cloud providers have incrementally been improving over the years. And so the default settings are largely pretty darn good. And so the things that we see are really about a lack of awareness. One hand doesn't know what the other is doing. Misconfigurations in our research, we find that they are by far the most prevalent security problem in the cloud, by far, in terms of numbers and data. And the technology itself is available to eliminate misconfigurations, whether it's by just keeping the defaults in place or using tooling, open source or vendor solutions to eliminate these misconfigurations. The technology is there, and it's not actually so difficult to implement. And so if you're not aware, then it's only going to hit your radar when the attackers, hit you, or when your data shows up on the dark web. And so, our recommendation is really, and the reason why I'm here talking to you today, is to spread awareness to teams building in the cloud. That the tooling will help, but the builders need to be aware of these risks so that they can build these things in, bake this into their solutions to better protect the organization.
Yeah. Not just to raise awareness, but to take action so that you're not the next victim. Yeah.
That's
right.
So
what can you tell us about your customers in Australia and the region?
Yeah, I was just in Australia just last week, and I've met several customers that, I don't think I can generalize, well, here's how Australian customers are. But what I will say is that, what I do know is that the priorities and the foundations that each company and each organization operates on are different. And these priorities that are different drive the conversation around whether cloud misconfigurations is a topic today, or if it's something that they'll get to next, like next year or next cycle. And this is not unusual in any country, Australia, notwithstanding. But what I think is specific to Australia is that there is actually broad awareness of initiatives like the Essential 8 and the efforts that the government and its services to provide companies and organizations a hand. For example, several of the CISOs that I've spoken with report updates to their board of directors using the language and the framework of the Essential 8 as a way to communicate. And that, I would say, in this hemisphere is somewhat unique and to be applauded, actually.
It's an example where government and government organizations have done the right thing and are helping. Now, another question is, and I know, as you just said, every business is different, but what is a typical customer onboarding journey, and how quickly can they operationalize this security?
With the adoption of cloud services today, I think it'd be very easy for me to say, "Oh yeah, you can get started quickly. Just put in a 10 pence and you'll be on your way." But because every company is on their own journey, and that also applies to the maturity of their security program or how relevant it is. I've worked with some customers in Australia that have been around for 70 years and just started their InfoSec program in the past few. What that says to me is that operationalizing cybersecurity, how that gets baked into your organization, really builds on top of the foundation of the company itself, the culture, the resources, the processes, the accountability, how people hold each other accountable, and then, of course, automation about all these things to make them go fast. The nature of that foundation shapes how cybersecurity is then embedded, because it's sort of like the uneven substrate that you have to then fill in. And this isn't optional. So regardless of whatever technological solutions a company can offer, if you don't understand how your company operates, you have no ability to secure it, even if you can get up and running fast as quickly as you can with software as a service solutions today.
Yeah, know thyself and keep exploring so that you know all the new aspects of yourself, because with the company it's continuously changing, and that's just life. But change is one of the only constants in the universe. Now, with cybersecurity criminals finding ever sneakier ways to break through defenses, what have been some of the sneakiest that you've seen in recent times? What happens with Rapid7 if this happens to one of your customers?
Yeah. So the way that I like to think about this is in terms of, whatever gets an attacker to their outcome most efficiently will win. And so I think the question about sneakiness doesn't jump to my mind as much as sort of like the cleverness of the attacker. For example, like a marketing department in a company, they seek demographics that maximize their chances of exposure and awareness. And attackers think like that as well. And one example that I recently became aware of in Australia is actually how some vulnerable populations, like, for example, Australian senior citizens, have been targeted. And the combination of low technology awareness and a higher need for remote services during the pandemic has really created this sort of like interesting segment. And attackers target the ways that senior citizens receive information. Like, say, pamphlets or information they receive at pharmacies that may direct them to a malicious website, which spoofs an actual service that they need information on. And so that information that they collect from these citizens can be basic information, as I mentioned before, like personal information. It may not even be financially damaging, but how it can be used to further attacks on vulnerable citizens is where the attackers are winning. Because you have to remember, these are not a nation state that is being attacked. These are just a segment of people in the population. And so you can generalize this to customers or different industries. But this example, of course, hit home for me because, well, many of us have families and can relate, right? And so when I think about how sneaky that is, it's like, well, it's a rather clever targeting. And Rapid7 actually offers solutions that help organizations monitor their digital footprint for cases like that, and actually aid in taking down some of these illegitimate or malicious assets on the internet. That's one of the things that we offer.
Yeah, I know that in Australia, people have been getting SMS messages, text messages saying that, you've been in the nearby somebody that had COVID-19. Click on this link to get your free COVID-19 test kits, and it takes you to a Services Australia website, which is fake, but looks extremely accurate. I mean, the days of emails having dodgy misspellings. I mean, some of them still do, but some of these are very, very smooth looking. You would fool the average person, and that's one example. Another, a couple of years ago, just before the pandemic, one of my mother's friends gave her some tickets, some scratchy tickets that she'd received in the mail. And when you scratch them, guess what? You've won $250,000. And it's some organization in Malaysia you have to contact. And immediately my radar went up, and I read about it online. And yep, it was a scam. But trying to scam people on just scratchy tickets. It's incredible what they will come up with next.
Yeah. And it exists because there is a benefit. Somebody's done the ROI analysis on it, and it works.
Yeah. If spam wasn't successful, it would have died out a long time ago.
That's correct.
Now, we've spoken about a lot of things, but is there anything else that our viewers should know about Rapid7 that I haven't already asked or that we haven't already discussed?
I think that in the information technology industry, and of course, even in the subset, which is information security, there's a sea of products and there's a sea of vendors and different solutions. And I think the thing that I'd like people to understand in Australia is that Rapid7 is composed of people that want to help companies operationalize and embed cybersecurity into how their business operates to get to their outcomes. And our team in Australia is actually a shining example of this culture. We have employees that work around the country, up and down the coast, across all the way to Western Australia, and all of them sort of have the same sort of spirit and team-based approach that we, as a 20-year-old company, has become just part of our core DNA.
Now, as we get towards the end of the interview, I always like to ask some questions about you. So what is a bit about your own history in the world of tech, and what got you interested in the cybersecurity space?
So I think like many of my generation, I found a love of computers and electronics in elementary school. And for me, that blossomed as I explored dial-up bulletin board systems.
I was
early
running one.
IRC. Yep, early IRC culture. I thought you looked familiar. And at 2400 baud. For me. And those text files and forums on hacking and cracking and things like that, for me, in hindsight, essentially answered the question, like, what could go wrong with all this magic? And that was really what sort of got me down this path.
I remember when I got a 2400 baud modem, I was really happy because I started with 300 baud, which was, you could see the text coming across the screen very slowly. Because now we talk about gigabits and megabits and gigabits and all the rest, and we've come such a long way. But what? The next question is, what is a typical day in the life of a regional CTO?
It sounds really dull and boring, but I spend as much time as I can reading. Because keeping up with threats and attackers and the technology that we use to prevent, detect, and respond to all these threats is a perpetual cycle. And it's not something that anybody's born knowing, right? It's a continuous process. And so, after I've done my reading, I try to speak with as many customers as I can to provide practical and evidence-based, fact-based approaches that we're undertaking, to help them shape their priorities. And then, really what it comes down for me is like reading, talking with customers, and then writing and helping to connect as many dots for as many people as I can.
Yeah. And I'm sure coming up with ideas and ways to improve Rapid7 even further, and working with the other CTOs and people in your business, engineers and all the rest. It's I mean, as with digital improvement, I've heard people saying, digital acceleration is dead. It's not that, it's continuous improvement. And so, reading and learning, that's just continuously improving yourself and continuously improving the software. And that's, again, that's life. That's what we do on planet Earth.
Yep.
So my third last question is, what is a memory you can share of your first computer? And what was your first virus/malware experience?
So my first computer was actually a Xerox CP/M machine, pre-DOS, and it had daisy wheel printer. And my first exposure to sort of malicious software was actually, I was fascinated by some of the early mutating variants of viruses that I didn't actually encounter these until I had a 286 with DOS. But I was fascinated by how they could mutate, and I actually collected. I had a collection of viruses on floppy disks, but of course, I had to keep them in a separate box because I wouldn't want those bits to be jumping from one disk to another. And it seems really nonsensical. Even at the time, it seemed nonsensical, but back then, it sort of put my childish brain at ease.
Yeah, I remember I went to somebody's place once and we loaded a disk into the computer, and next thing, the stone virus appeared. It said your computer was stoned, and I had to help them sort of rebuild the computer. I mean, luckily back in those DOS days, wasn't too difficult, but it was like it was a shock. And obviously these days with ransomware, it's a lot more shocking. But thankfully, my experiences with malware have been pretty minimal since. So. And I'm sure it's the same for you and your customers too. Now,
My fingers.
yes, fingers crossed, absolutely. Now, my second last question is: what is some of the best advice you've received in life to help you get where you are today?
As a technologist, I would love to say that it was something about technology or learning technology. But the best advice that I've gotten actually is about knowing your audience and then telling them the story that they need to hear in the way that they need to hear it. Computers have always been magical to me. Technology has always been magical to me, but the technology actually doesn't matter unless you understand the human need for it, which drove its creation. And so, because humans learn most often through storytelling, that's something that I probably learned later in my life than I would have liked. But now that I know it, I think it's the most valuable piece of advice that I've received.
Everybody loves a good story.
Mm-hmm.
So, what is your final message to ITWire viewers and readers, and to your current and future customers and partners?
I think you stole my thunder a little bit earlier in that you said change is constant. And because that's sort of a thread that runs throughout all the things that I say. And the technology changes, of course. But, Rapid7 as an organization, being over 20 years old, would be old enough to drive cars and vote and all these things. And we help over 10,000 customers globally to operationalize cybersecurity within the context of their business, and really helping them navigate to their outcomes. And I hope customers just give us a chance to see what we can do.
Yeah, and actually, just whilst I'm thinking of it, I remember I forget what it's called now, but there was a movie about the Seven Samurais. What does Rapid7 stand for? Do you know this history behind the name?
So Rapid7's origin story, Rapid7 as a company was founded in New York City, and Rapid7 is actually it's a moniker for a subway line that doesn't exist anymore, but that the founders would actually take from where they lived to their offices. And so it's a name that has stuck. We actually have some of our founders that still work with us after all these years, and it sort of denotes how we operate too. Like it's a process we're moving forward, but we know where we're going. There are rails to this, and we want people to come on board.
Well, Ken Mizota, the regional CTO of APJ at Rapid7, thank you very much for your time. Thanks for sharing all of the stories. There was some great storytelling there, and I hope we can talk again in the future.
Yeah, thank you very much, Alex.
Okay, bye-bye.